Good evening. It's 6:30, so we'll start. Fire evacuation. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Thank you. Next, to note that the open proceedings of the meeting are being webcast. Is that correct? It's on? Okay. Next, to ask that all mobiles are either switched off or put to silent, please. Now, apologies. I've received 2 apologies, one from Councillor Robert Taylor and one from Councillor Dunlop. I notice Councillor West isn't here, but I haven't received any apologies from him. Thought I'd mention that. And we have a replacement. Councillor Sherlock is here to replace Councillor Taylor. Okay, thank you. Are there any declarations of conflicts of interest? No? Right, I have no urgent items. Now, can we confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of September, which can be found at paper A? Are we agreed? Yes, thank you. Now, member and public participation upon issues contained within the agenda. I understand that nobody's actually wishing to speak to any of the issues, correct? Okay, thank you. I don't have any referrals from other committees from the Council or Cabinet, and the portfolio holder hasn't said that she wants to speak on anything, so we can get on with the main business of the agenda. I am just proposing that we keep paper C until the end, as we've got people who are interested in the Hackney Carriage and private hire issue, to save you sitting through our licensing policy. We'll move paper C to the end, but do the others in order. So we will begin therefore with paper B, which is found on page 6 of 123, and this is a review of our licensing fees and charges. Karen, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to enable members to consider the increase in fees and charges for licences and registrations to commence from the 1st of April 2014, and the increase is set in line with the budget strategy of 2.25%. So the tables for the current fees and the proposed fees can be found at Appendix 1, which is on page 10, and that's the Hackney Carriage and private hire fees. And then over the page you've got Appendix 2. Now I've given you all another copy of Appendix 2, because there's a slight change to the table that you've got in front of you in the report, because what there should be added is a fee for the zoo licence exemption, and that is for the vets costs only, but that should be in that table. But also Appendix 2 includes the Gambling Act fees, which are subject to the increase. So you've also got that in your new copy of Appendix 2. Then Appendix 3 on page 12 are the fees for the gaming permits under the Gambling Act and the Licensing Act fees. Now they're currently centrally set by government, and there's no change to those, so that's just for information, that Appendix 3. Home Office have announced there is going to be consultation for Licensing Act fees to be set locally, and they're going to be issued very soon, with regulations to be issued next summer. But at the moment they're set centrally. Appendix 4A to 4C are tables which show the proposed Basingstoke and Deane fees for 2014 to 15 compared to other Hampshire authorities. But the other Hampshire authorities' figures are for the current year, unless otherwise marked. And the only fees that are in those tables are where we can directly compare them with Basingstoke and Deane. So the table on 4A, which is on page 16, that's the Hackney Carriage and private hire fees compared. 4B on page 19 are the other licensing functions compared, and 4B goes up to page 22. Are you all with me still? Because when you get to page 22, that'll be the end of 4B, but after that the report jumps to page 27, so it looks like there's some pages missing, but there isn't, they're just incorrectly numbered. Okay, and then pages 27 to 32 are duplicate. It's a duplicate table, so just ignore those pages. So 27 to 32, just ignore. And then if you go straight to page 33, you'll get to the 4C, which is the table comparing the Gambling Act fees for all the other authorities, as well as Basingstoke and Deane. So I hope that's clear. So the licence fees must all be set on a cost recovery basis. We're not allowed to generate any income from the fees. And a full review of the fees and charges is going to be undertaken very shortly to make sure we require that requirement to cover costs and for the regulatory changes in the Licensing Act fees. If members approve the fees, the vehicle and operator fees will have to be advertised and undergo a 28-day consultation period. And any objections received to that would be considered at February's meeting next year. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So we understand that this is in a sense an interim request for an increase in fees and charges. Are there any questions at this stage? Yes, Councillor Goderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just curious on 16 of 123, the Basingstoke and Dean proposed charges seem pretty high compared with everybody else. I just wonder, is there any particular reason why they should be so much higher than most of the other people? Thank you.
The fees at the moment are, what we've added to the previous years is the standard budget increase of 2.25%. But what we are going to be doing is a full review of all of the fees, which is going to start either later on this month or next month. So we will be addressing that.
I presume we probably asked the same question last year. I'm just sort of slightly curious. Is there no particular reason why we seem to be out of kilter with everybody else? I mean, I understand what you're saying, that it's a 2.5% increase on what it was last year, which brings up these figures, but obviously the position was the same last year, I presume.
In many councils, some councils will agree to subsidise the costs, and many of the costs are based on historic data. So it's not a case that we've gone through these figures and actually gone back and questioned the difference to them. I think the process for this council in terms of the corporate direction has been that we look to cover the costs that we think we're incurring. As Karen has said, there's some changes in the legislative background that's coming through, and so we will be actually carrying out a far more thorough review of those costs and charges based on time recording and actual percentage data, so we can actually say we don't know how others have calculated their costs, but we know exactly how ours are calculated. And I think then it's for the authority to decide whether they want to subsidise the costs or not. And as I say, with everything else, the general direction from members has been, that the fees cover the cost of preparation.
Yes, I appreciate all that. I mean, I don't like to load work on borough officers because I know you all work, have worked terribly hard anyway. Is there any merit, do you think, in finding out which of these other authorities actually subsidise their fees?
That might be useful as part of our overall thorough review. I'm concerned about the process for these, because obviously these are going into the budget for next year, and so we need to have some reliance upon them, and I'm not sure that we'll be able to get that data back in time for consideration by the licensing committee to then go into the budgetary process. So if I can say that we hear what you're saying, and in terms of our more thorough review, we would look to carry out that exercise as part of that and come back with more information at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. So could that be minuted then, that we're requesting that when the review goes through, once we've got the further guidelines from the Home Office, that actually incorporated in that is some rationale for how we come to our figures and how other councils come to theirs? Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my questions have been asked, actually, but the one I'd like to ask is on page 10 of 123, where you've, for instance, got vehicle fixing bracket and all right, it's only gone up 15p, or proposed to go up 15p. Do we actually fit the bracket, or is that the cost of the bracket gone up? Because I don't really understand why it would go up. If someone's buying a bracket, that's the cost of the bracket they are going to put it on. Could you sort of explain that?
That's just the cost of actually providing the bracket itself. It's just a piece of goods that they buy. It's a bracket. Oops, sorry.
Bracket, but we're proposing an increase. Is that increase already there? Is what I'm trying to get at. Or are we just putting an increase on and actually, not being rude, creaming off the top? There's no other way of putting it.
The charges, it's a flat increase across them. Whatever increase is actually in the goods itself has been absorbed into that increase overall. So we're not making any income from the fees that we're charging. I've not made that clear.
So what you're saying is that the bracket may cost less, but because it's averaged out over these other things, that's the cost. Is that what you're telling me? Or have I got that?
If I can explain the situation corporately across the council, the Section 151 author, Kevin, has identified that the average increase needs to be, I think it's 2.25, sorry, 2.25. So what has happened with the licensing fees, because we know, and that's to kind of accommodate all the kind of increased costs within the council, so increased human resource costs, increased heating costs, all costs. So there hasn't been, for the licensing fees, a review of each fee, looking at it line by line. They generally put it up with by 2.25% to reflect, as it were, inflationary processes that he's identified. The purpose and the point that we're saying is that what we will be doing is undertaking a line-by-line review of each of these licenses to ensure that we're in compliance with the provision that says that we only, and that we are clear that we're up to date, that we only recover the charges for procedures, because we don't have that data at this moment in time to do that.
Understand that, but what I don't understand, if I was honest, is the fact that you're buying an item, and I assume they must buy it from us or from a supplier, but we're putting a charge on it, and I don't understand what input we're putting into it. If we were saying, right, we're like that bracket or replacement door something, I don't understand, unless the manufacturing costs have gone up, why we're putting costs on top, other than if we were actually fitting it, or there's maybe a small cost handing it over. Does that, I just don't understand.
I think you make a good point, and we don't personally know, I don't know if you do, whether the cost of that bracket has gone up by that amount or not. But what I understand, therefore, is that this is an interim inflationary increase, and those sort of details will be incorporated in the more detailed review that Linda has said that she'll undertake. It says in 4.4 that the licensing manager will undertake a thorough review of the fees and charges.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't know how we can then look at increasing fares, because one follows the other. If the cost of one thing is higher, it's got to be passed on. You know, see where I'm coming from, but anyway, thanks very much.
Councillor Raphael.
To ask about this process of review, I have to say I'm glad it's being undertaken. In fact, I think it should have been done years ago, but it just is one of those things that seems to have only just been thought about. The fact is, as I understand it, it's all part of a review to work out whether the service is paying for itself in terms of the staff that are employed and the fees that are being generated. So it's become self-funding. Is that right?
Sorry, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, in that there was some previous legislation which allowed the authority to include enforcement costs, the overall cost of the provision of the service when calculating fees. There's been a recent EU directive and also a recent court case that actually now says the only costs that you can put on in terms of your application fees relate to actually the processes and procedures for completing an application. So you can no longer include enforcement charges in the cost. So essentially, actually, we won't be paying for ourselves. There will be an element of the licensing service which relates to enforcement, which will have to be met from the council corporately and not from the regeneration from fees. And that court case has come out recently. We've been waiting for government guidance on this because, as ever, there's so many licenses, there's so many licensing provisions, and the directive has been in conflict with UK legislation, and so we've been waiting for guidance to come out to kind of square the circle and give guidance to authorities as to whether enforcement costs or compliance costs can be included when you are looking at fees and charges. Hence the reason why we know we've got to do this root and branch review, because we've got to separate the compliance charges and the enforcement charges one from the other.
Well, thank you. I do understand what you're saying, and clearly enforcement costs can be gained from successful prosecutions, and that's the only other way. But could you tell me how long you think this review will take, and a little bit of how you're going to conduct it? Because there's another reason, but I don't need to explain now. But I'd just like to hear how it's going to be done, how long it would take, please.
We have put it in our service plan for this municipal year. So for the period up until May of next year. I know that we are actually starting to begin that process now. In fairness, you will see the number of licenses that we've got to address, and you'll also understand the issues on resource. So I do expect it to be towards the latter part, late spring, early summer, before that is completed and coming before this committee. So it's not something that's going to take, a couple of weeks. It will go into the spring and early summer, but we are hoping to get that completed in this municipal year.
Be conducted. Are the officers going to be keeping a working log of how many hours they spend on a particular case, that sort of thing? And is it every officer who's going to be told from Monday morning, this is what you do, it's going to be rolled out across the whole department, and that's what you do, and this is who it goes to, and someone's going to analyse the figures regularly? Is that what's going to go on?
Yes, and in fact, Andrew's just been telling me that they've already started that and been doing it for some months. Obviously, because licensing is cyclical in nature and some things happen only once a year, they've had to been doing it for some time, and they've been doing it for a year as preparatory work. What we also need to do, because obviously the costs are not just limited to the licensing officers, they have on costs and things. So we've got our accountants involved as well, who are going to be undertaking work about what else kind of feeds into that process, what other costs are actually borne by the service in carrying that out. So we've done some preparatory work, but because some things only happen once a year, we need to continue to get a picture of that.
Could you just clear up when we're talking about the how long all this is going to take? I understand about the EU directive and all the rest of it, and that the licensing manager is going to organise a review over the coming months. But it says in 4.3 that the Home Office will be issuing regulations about locally set fees on June 2014, which is quite a long way ahead. Will we have to look again at everything when that comes?
We're hoping that we'll have papers in advance of that which give us the direction of where it's going. So we're hoping that we have guidance before that we can place some reliance on. There might be a little bit of tinkering around the edges, but there shouldn't be big surprises coming our way, hopefully.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions for the officers? We've got Mr. Ketteringham here. Did you want to speak to this particular issue or not? No, not this one. Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion, therefore, that you'd like to make on this? Or can we take it that this is an interim inflationary increase and we are trusting that it will be fully and properly reviewed over the next few months and we'll have a much more detailed account of how these charges arrived at? Okay, thank you. We're all agreed? Yes? Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll now move, therefore, to paper D on page 87 of 123. One amendment to the private hire vehicle specification and approval of additional PHV licence condition. Thank you. I think this is Andrew.
Thank you very much. This report followed a request we got from a member of the private hire trade to licence an eco-friendly vehicle type. After research, we recommend the current passenger legroom requirement in private hire vehicles is decreased by 2 inches and that the additional private hire vehicle condition at paragraph 3.8 be approved. Our current legroom requirements prevent some vehicles from being licensed as private hire vehicles. In particular, but not exclusively, this would affect vehicles designed to have a lesser impact upon the environment, such as electric powered cars, which operate using lower carbon emission levels. We consider these vehicle types of significant environmental benefits and we support eco-friendly vehicles being licensed so long as they offer good passenger comfort levels. It would obviously be the responsibility of the operator to ensure that any electric powered car is suitably charged for the journey length of the passengers. The proposed reduction would make legroom requirements 28 inches from the seat base to the surface in front, whether that be the dashboard or the front seat, the back of the seat in front of you. 28 inches is a level that is commonly applied by other licensing authorities in relation to their vehicle specification requirements. We've inspected several other already licensed vehicle types and some others to make this recommendation, and we feel that this still maintains a good passenger comfort level. Thank you.
It's very simple. Does anybody have a question? Councillor Frankham?
Did you approach anyone from disabled user groups on that reduction? Because although Hackneys are wheelchair friendly, not all disabled people can use them. For instance, my mother can't use them. So was there any discussion on that? Because that 2 inches might be a fantastic difference for certain disabilities.
We haven't, and this would be a minimum, obviously, requirement. I mean, a lot of the vehicles, the ones that are already out there, meet the existing requirement, which is 30 inches. So no, we haven't approached any disabled groups about this.
You don't get a choice of which one turns up when you phone up to book a private hire. I know in the past cars have turned up, and even if it's current spec, my mum's had to turn them away because she couldn't get in. So I am really concerned. Nothing's been done around that, because there are quite a number. You're never going to fit all disabilities, because that's why there's something like 4,000 cars on the motability list to try and meet them all. But I would have expected some investigation on that front. And I don't know what difference they do. If I'm out with a couple of my mates, I look tiny compared to them. That's going to make a big difference when we want to get cab home.
No, there's conditions on private hire operator licences, and it's the responsibility of the operators when they're accepting bookings to make sure that they're getting sufficient details from passengers. And if passengers do need certain requirements, such as minibuses or direct access, then they should hopefully be asking those questions when the book has been taken and provide a suitable vehicle. When we got into this particular vehicle, there was 2 officers that were just below 6 foot, so we thought that was reasonably sized to actually sit, front and back concurrently, so to make sure it's still reasonable passenger comfort levels.
I think I would have liked to seen it, but I don't want to stop electric vehicles from coming online, because that's obviously good for everyone. So I'm just a little disappointed the disabled groups were not approached. And in the past, you've had to brought a vehicle up here so that we can have a look at it. Maybe might have been worth it this time, but I'll leave that for the future.
Councillor Godson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, obviously, I think most of us would agree that these sort of cars could be very beneficial for the environment. Bearing in mind that they have a 90-mile radius and they need to start off their journey with a fully charged battery, what are the facilities for recharging the batteries? Where are they supposed to go? Can they do it off a house electrical supply, or does there need to be a garage which can cater for them? And if so, where is it?
No, I believe that they can do them off of house supplies. There are no outside ones currently, but the chap who actually approached us is working on that to see if he can actually get one installed in the borough. He's working to try and get that outside his house.
But you're saying they can be recharged on a domestic supply system? Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's basically not our problem. It's the problem of the person driving it. Does anybody want any further discussion on that, or are we happy to approve that amendment? Yes? Thank you. Okay, that's agreed. Thank you. We'll now move to the Hackney Carriage fare increase request, which is paper E on page 107 of 123. And I believe Mr. Kettering will want to speak. Would you like to come forward now? But meanwhile, I'll ask Andrew to introduce it. Thank you.
So this paper is to enable members to consider a fare increase request as submitted by the Hackney Carriage Federation. This can be seen at Appendix 1. It was previously agreed that officers would liaise with the Federation to review Hackney Carriage fares on an annual basis, and for the annual request to be presented to the Licensing Committee at the same time that the licensing fees and charges report is presented. Officers met with the Federation to discuss the increased proposal, and the Federation consulted their members, holding a vote to determine a preferred increase request. The proposal is to add 20 pence to the normal fare, to reduce waiting time increments from 50 to 40 seconds, and to add 20 pence to the Christmas and New Year flagged fare, so that's the times subject to 100% surcharges. Members will note from the Hackney Carriage request that the surcharge period is also proposed to extend to an earlier time on New Year's Eve until the 2nd of January. For meter calculation purposes, the 20 pence increment proposal was amended to spread the 20p increase over miles 1 to 3, as opposed to a 20 pence increase for mile 2 only. The net result is the same 20 pence increase by mile 3. The standard of the Hackney fleet is high, and officers feel that this is a reasonable request to enable proprietors to maintain running their businesses and provide a clean and comfortable service while absorbing an increase to business overheads as detailed within paragraph 4.4. Fare comparisons to neighbouring and family group authorities are included at Appendix 3, and a table at 4.6 shows the effects of the proposed fare increase at normal tariff times. We recommend that members consider and approve this request. If approved, we have to advertise it by public notice for a period of 14 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do welcome the simplified table. It's getting a bit complicated last time. Are there any questions at this stage for Andrew? Any clarification needed? No? Yes, Councillor Goodison.
Slight tangent, Chairman, not about the actual fees themselves, but I'm quite interested in this statement on Appendix 1 in the response from the Basingstoke and Dean Federation. It says, we'd also like to discuss, as was mentioned in the last meeting, the possibility of taking the control of managing the fares from the committee to the level of council officers and the trade itself, save coming into the committee whenever we need an increase. Is there any development in that, and how do the officers feel about that request? Thank you.
I think I'll say we'll discuss this in due course because we haven't actually heard from Mr. Kettering yet, but we will definitely be coming to that. Okay. Are there any other questions at this stage, or is that on that subject? Okay, thank you. Okay, then, Mr. Kettering, would you like to say what you've got to say?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. The only real term increase would be the 20 pence over miles 1 to 3. That's basically for general rising in costs, as I explained in the report there, with the especially the rising in energy costs and living costs. And we've looked at wanting to get the 50% and 100% surcharge changed because of the amount of confusion we're having from customers who are using taxis at different time of the day and night. When they're getting in, say, at tariff 1, it's going £6, and we're having to explain why it's going £8.40, £8.70 rather than the full £9. And especially when somebody's had quite a bit of drink, it's very difficult to explain the difference between the yardage in day rate to night rate. And we feel that if it was levelled out across the board, that would save all the confusion totally. If somebody gets in a taxi and it's £6 during the day, it will cost £9 during the night, bar any traffic, etc. The changes of times on New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve, we had varying amount of people that were asking us, we want to do this time, want to do that time. So we chose to do a vote, of which we voted for the 8 o'clock on Christmas Eve and the 7 o'clock on New Year's Eve. Of the people that spoke to us with the New Year's Eve, they were saying that basically people are finishing work at, say, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and revellers are starting to go out at 7 o'clock. And when it obviously goes quiet between 10 and midnight, they're sitting there and they feel that if they're, with great respect, if they're out working, they should get a fair amount for what they're working. But of course, you know, not every customer is the same, and we're all very reasonable. So if somebody comes up and they want to go somewhere, they haven't got enough money, then that leaves it down to the driver's discretion to charge less. And it takes away all the kind of arguments and all that, and we're all quite easygoing, you know, we're quite willing to discuss things. If somebody's only got £9 to get home rather than £12, then, you know, we're not silly enough not to take them for the matter of a few pound. But we feel that because we've put the 20 pence over miles 1 to 3, the elderly and the people that live within a mile of the town centre are not going to get the fare increase as it was before, where it was going straight on the first mile, and the first mile 1 to 2 will only go up by 10p, and then miles 2 to 3 will only go up another 10p. So the people are basically living over 2 miles, 2.5 miles, are only going to be paying an extra 20 pence. The 40 seconds down from 50 seconds, we're having an awful lot of problems now around Basingstoke, especially with the local roadworks. Alonson Link being a prime example, where you can sit on the station, get a fare, and if you say get a fare to Kempshot, it will take you 20 to 25 minutes to get there, another say 15 minutes to get back, and it's taking you between 40 and 45 minutes to do one fare. Now if it goes £10, you get back to the station, you wait another 45 minutes for a fare, so in theory in 2 hours, or nearly 2 hours, you've only earned £5.50 an hour. And we feel that in the rush hour, and especially in the morning, people are going to business parks. We're having a lot of problems with traffic going down to Chinham Business Park, Viables, etc. And we just feel, you know, a little bit of extra waiting time would at least make some kind of a dent into the costs that we're losing through sitting in traffic. Fundamentally, that I personally feel that the road infrastructure around Basingstoke, all the estates, all the new estates that have been built around the outskirts and even in the town centre, has increased the population in Basingstoke. There's more people on the road, yet the road infrastructure hasn't changed for years. Apart from the odd couple of different twists and turns and that, I mean, the so-called ring road of ours that has got 6 roundabouts in it, and you can't really go around the town without hitting about half an hour's worth of traffic in the rush hour. And it's basically down to the lack of decent infrastructure in the town, we feel. As we can all understand, we've all been sat on the ring road at 6 o'clock in the evening waiting to get down to Black Dam, and you're just sitting there twiddling your thumbs most of the time. But no, that's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. You're certainly preaching to the converted. How many of us have begged for something to be done about infrastructure when it comes to new development, etc.? But there we go. Are there any questions, please, for Mr. Ketteringham? Yes, Councillor Regan.
Last year you had quite a good increase in your fares that covered your costs, etc. But it was an impact upon people whose wages are frozen and in tough times. Did it affect business?
Personally, I don't think it did. I'm still seeing the same amount of people coming up to the station, and especially when people are coming out of the railway station, since we've had the private hire firm outside the front, we are still getting an awful lot of business. They still want a taxi. With greatest respect, if I was out on a night, want to get home, I'm personally willing to pay to get home. And if it all goes back, I think, to the vehicles we're using. If we're having to cover the costs and to insure the vehicles and to service the vehicles that we've got that were set back in 1989, we have to get some kind of reasonable income to cover our costs to do that. But personally, I think, if anything, business has picked up a little bit since over the last year, especially, I think.
If business has picked up, surely you can absorb the cost then.
It's picked up a little bit, but we're still not absorbing all the costs. I mean, as well as the fact that we've in theory still not absorbed the costs of the 6-month delay with the last increase, whereas we're all out of pocket, I reckon, by about between £700 and £900, and we're getting better, but we're still not able to absorb the whole cost in the increase of business.
Any more questions? No? Are you fairly confident that you've got a sort of reasonably good consensus from the Federation this time? We had a few objectors last time that held up the whole process.
I made sure this time when I did the vote, I had all the drivers' names, went up to every driver, made sure I spoke to the driver, got the vote off them, so nobody come back a week later and say, oh, you didn't come and speak to me, didn't whatever. But I made sure I got hold of about 99%, well, most of the drivers anyway.
And just because we're going to be coming to it later anyway, is there anything further you want to say about your proposal to agree any fare increases between just yourselves and officers, or is that just a straight proposal?
I mean, I don't mean to be rude. I think the system works very well, but it seems very time consuming, and with respect, the council officers and us ourselves are intelligent enough to sit down and not going to price ourselves out of the market. You know, we've got businesses to run, and it's not just a case of sitting with Andy or Karen or whatever and saying, yeah, we want this, this and this. You know, it will all be done by voting from the trade. It won't be just a case of us going in and deciding this. It'll still be done the same way, but just basically funneled through the licensed officers rather than coming to committee.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Frankham.
So what you want to do is an agreement with the officers for the pricing, not just us to administer it. Because I'll be dead against that. If you want to just set the price yourself and you've overpriced tough, and we just administer it for you, I'll be happy with that. But to take us out when the officers are setting the charges, it never happens. That's taking the democracy out. So I just want to be clear. You just want to set the... basically, the reason I asked, I was talking to a friend of mine after the last one. He got in a cab, and obviously the price has gone up. And you just blame the council. Because yes, we technically did set it, but we were rubber stamping your request. So we are either completely involved in my or we just administer the system for you. So you set the prices, you come along and say that's the prices we want to do, and then we go through the process of administrating and doing the clocks. Do you understand what? Yeah. Do you just want to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, it confused me a little bit then. Basically, yes. So the meters will still be, in theory, rubber stamped by the council to be confirmed to what the price will be. But it's just a case of, rather than to come up and say to you guys, this is what we'd like to sit with the officers, say this is what we'd like, and then it would go to confirmation through the council to confirm that it's okay to get it. I mean, I don't think we could ever come away from the fact that the meters are never governed by the council, because then you get into silly territory where one driver will say, well, I want this, I want that, and that would take away any kind of decent control, and I don't agree with that.
I just think there's a little bit cost. We'll always administer the meters and setting the prices. The trade will say this is the fare we wish to have. If the council are going to be agreeing that, it will have to go through some form of democracy. We're not going to delegate that power away. Understand what I'm saying? But if you just want to set the prices and we just do an administration, you know, I've got no problem with that. We don't set the prices of buses, trains.
Yeah, sorry, I finally get it now. Yes. Yeah, like in theory, you don't tell a bar or the train company what to charge or whatever, but it's just a case of us saying, yes, you'd administer it, but this is what we'd like to charge. But obviously you couldn't go into a bar and say you have to charge £3 a pint. It's basically giving some of the, because of the fact we're obviously running a business, it'll still be administered by the council, but yes, exactly what you said then, Paul. That's fine, yeah.
Right, if I could just intercede here, this is a question time, so I mean, with all due respect, you won't be actually part of the discussion. But if there are any genuine questions for Mr. Ketteringham, I'll take them. Yes, Councillor Jones.
I'm new on this committee after a number of years, but last time I was on it was quite a few years ago, and they were talking about taxi ranks. Now, the way you was talking, and to be honest, most of your fares you're talking about from the train station. Have you, as a group of people, tried elsewhere in the town, and how is that progressing?
Yeah, so most of our business is from the railway station. A lot of us use the rank down at Festival Place, but this is a thing we've come against in the past, is we've asked for better signage around Festival Place. As Andy will know, we've had discussions back and forth whether Festival Place should put a sign up, the council should put a sign up. If we could use the rank down at Church Street, if it was busy, if you get custom through it because people knew it was there, then fair enough. But you're not physically going to sit down there 3 hours and not get a fare because you'd be out of business within a year. But I think a lot of the problem with the ranks around Basingstoke is signage. Even the rank down at Festival Place, it's a little sign about that big. I think that's a major problem, is the signage around the town where the taxi ranks are situated. And Councillor Franken went around with Mick a little while ago, and we brought up some problems with the actual position of the ranks as well. If you try and put a wheelchair in at Church Street, you can't, because the path is so narrow that as soon as you put your ramp out, you've got to have somebody that's about that thin to get them around, to get them into the thing. But I'm sure Councillor Franken's got the report about the taxi ranks and all the situations that we've had, haven't you?
You have or not? It's not relevant. Thank you. Councillor Regan.
I mean, last year's discussion on this, I was involved in it. There was some talk about, carrying on from what you discussed with Councillor Frank just a minute ago, was about the taking away the setting of the fares from this committee. The idea, I think it was floated there, to deregulation, actually take it. How would you feel if really taxi drivers could set their own fares? Oh, sorry, I've got mine on still.
I think I'd have to have more thought about that, really. There's plus points, there's not plus points, but it's something that I think would have to be brought into very deeply to talk about, to discuss, because it's something you can't really just think of just off the top. I think it's something that's got to have a very good long discussion about to come to, satisfy both our needs, really.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. Any more questions for Mr. Ketteringham? No, thank you very much. Thank you. So if we'd like to discuss these proposed increases, I think if we discuss it in 3 sections, the first is the chart on page 1110 of 123, which gives a simplified version of what is being proposed. We'll then just talk about Christmas and New Year, and then we'll talk about the question that was raised about the fare increases being agreed between officers and the Federation. So first of all, the proposal 4.6, any comments or discussion points there? Councillor Regan.
I think after we had a hell of a long discussion about this last year about fare increases, remember then the taxi drivers come up with an amended version and we voted for that, and they all got a good increase. But I would say my constituents and a lot of people in Basingstoke have not had a good increase, and public sector pay freeze, and actually in the private sector all wages have been frozen. So I think in terms of, I don't think the their case is proved that they need an increase. I think actually, so I think I think we should not vote for an increase in the fares. I think 20 pence is too much.
Any other comments on what Councillor Regan said? Yes, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'd have to beg to differ with Councillor Regan. I think that the taxi owners run their own businesses. As Mr. Kettering has said, they know their business. They wouldn't ask for fare increase if they thought their business couldn't sustain. And for that reason, I'd be happy to go with their view of the business that they run and support the fare increase.
Anybody else? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I must admit, I've got thoughts that perhaps, you know, when we're looking at the overall economy, things are picking up, but we know from people working in this building what increases they've had in private sectors. I do worry that we are actually trying, maybe in the end, maybe not this year, but eventually we'll price out black cabs altogether. And when it happens, and then we deregulate the whole thing, and then we end up with a big mess like other towns. So I don't think I could go along with that increase as it is now.
Any other points of view? Councillor Godison.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's reasonable to say, although we all know that the price of diesel has dropped slightly, I mean, I think we all are aware of the fact that, you know, repair costs and insurance costs and all the other costs which they're subject to have, I would imagine, increased reasonably substantially. So I think the issue is not whether they should have an increase, you know, to cover their costs, because I think they should. But there is another issue about whether the general public can afford it, and whether it's therefore sensible for them to ask for it. But it strikes me that that's the issue. But I've no doubt their costs have gone up and need to be covered in their view, and this would cover it. The question is whether the public are going to suffer to the point that their businesses will then suffer. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I've forgotten to have my microphone on. So therefore, I mean, and I do welcome the lack of increase for the first mile. I think that's quite fair. When I look at the percentage increases, they're not as high as the fees and charges that we've just, the increase we've levied on those. And so therefore, I think on this occasion, I would personally be happy to approve the suggested increases. Could I therefore propose that we do approve this, but this is just for this chart, that we do approve this chart of increases. Do I have a seconder? All those in favour of approving this chart? And against? 3. Thank you very much. That's passed. Just as the extra thing that we just have to look at, of course, they're also asking for a slight extension in the time of the double fee that they're charging over New Year. Are we happy with this? And of course, that is at their discretion as well. It's a discretionary one, and they can choose to charge less if they want to. Are we generally happy to say yes to that? Agreed. Agreed? Vote? We'll have a vote then. I will propose it. Second it. All those in favour? And against? Thank you very much. That's passed. That deals with the fare increase side of things. Now, if we'd just like to make any comments that you want to make about the notion of actually excluding elected members from the process of fare increases and just having it decided between the Federation and officers. Would anybody like to comment on that? Councillor Jones first.
Well, I just think if we're going down that line, it's going to end up with deregulation of the whole thing, and that's something I don't want in Basingstoke. Because the one good thing, I may have voted against the increase, but the one good thing with these taxi cabs, everybody knows who they are, what they stand for, and if we go down that line, I believe eventually it'll be deregulated and we'll end up with anything on the road, and any fares anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Regan.
I might have asked a question about deregulation, but I don't believe in it. But I think in terms we need to keep this committee is a check. I mean, the officers can sit down with the taxi providers and actually look at the costs and look at the technicality and come up with a price. But it comes back to us, who people are elected to represent people and their customers, and we can actually be a check. It's a check and a balance. So I like to keep this democratic control over it, actually. I mean, every other fare is regulated, not very well. I mean, trains are regulated by the Office of Rail Regulation, not very well. And the county regulates the bus fares. So we must keep a regulation on taxi fares.
Thank you very much. Councillor Godison.
Thank you, Chair. Well, my view is that it would. I personally think it would be helpful for the officers if they have a request come in from the drivers, which they're finding it difficult to consider and perhaps not terribly happy with. It's actually helpful for them to have somebody else to put the blame on. So I think we should take the blame, be prepared to take the blame. Thank you.
Councillor Frankham.
The problem I've got at the moment is the way the current system's working. All we seem to do is get them. I don't recall us ever not rubber stamping them or agreeing them in the long run. I don't know how much it costs for a hackney cab to do a mile. How much profit margin does the driver make a living wage from that? There's not enough detail. And if we're going to be setting the prices, I'd want to go into real details to understand exactly what it's costing. How much, are they making a good living from it? And we haven't got that. So that's what I've got a problem with this. And at the moment, as I said earlier, that we get the blame for the price increases anyway, because technically, yes, we do put the prices up, but we're only reacting to what the trade's come and asked us. I wouldn't deregulate the whole lot. I'd be happy if we took out the whole process of us setting the fares. They used to come to the council and say, these are the fares we want to, as a trade charge, and we administrate it that way, and not have this process if that's one. If they price themselves out the market, well, that's their problem. But it needs a lot more work into it, and if we're going to carry on with this system, I'd want a lot more detail on what the profit margins are they making a sensible living, or we get value for money for the people that are using the hackney cabs. So there's a lot of questions. I think there's quite a big piece of work, really, if we were to look into it properly.
I think I would say to that, is it for us to say how good a living hackney carriage drivers should make? I think, there's... yes, Councillor, what's your name? Burgess.
Thank you. I'm totally against this idea, but I'd just like to point out that the next step down the road would be residents wandering in from time to time to discuss with the chief exec just how much council tax they should pay and what they think's fair. That would be the ultimate. We could all go home then. No, I'm against this. I think this is what we've been elected to do, is to look after the travelling public, and I think it would be a negation of our responsibility if it was passed on.
I think it's fair to say this wouldn't in any case be the forum to make such a decision, and Suzanne is looking into it and to see what other councils are doing, although I think very few do exclude the elected members, because we are elected not only to represent the public, who are the passengers, but also those are the hackney carriage drivers who are resident in Basingstoke. And there is public accountability when we can discuss these things in a webcast meeting that anybody can look at. It would seem very much behind closed doors if it was decided just between the drivers and officers. And so I think, are we generally agreed that at this time it's certainly not a decision that we'll be making in this forum? Yes, agreed. Councillor Godison.
I would prefer it if the committee sent a steer that this is not something which we would wish to suggest should be agreed by anybody, by full council. I mean, I think we have a job to tell full council what our opinion is, and they can decide whether they want to follow it or not. But I would like it said that we don't approve this idea. And I don't, when you say that Suzanne's taking steps to find out what other councils are doing, I don't feel we have to sort of follow other councils if we don't want to.
We certainly don't, and it would be interesting to know, but no, we don't have to follow it. So we are generally agreed that as the elected members, we feel that democratically we should be the ones to, and I don't like the word rubber stamp, to discuss and come to an agreement on what increases should be. Thank you. Okay, that's agreed. Thank you. We've agreed everything we need to on that paper. So that's everything now to do with hackney carriages and private hire vehicles. We're just going to go on to our very last subject now, which is paper C on page 37. And this is looking for our approval for the adoption by the Council of the 5-year Statement of Licensing Policy following a review. This, as you will recall, we looked at in some fine detail at an earlier meeting. So we really are just looking at the proposed minor amendments. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, yeah, paper C, which is on page 37. This is the report to update members on the outcome of the consultation on that draft statement, which is the 5-year policy under the Licensing Act, for its members to consider and approve the policy in its final form. The original draft was presented to the Licence Committee in July, and after minor amendments was put out to consultation, which ended on the 5th of November. 7 responses were received via the online response form. Results you can find at Appendix 2. And officers' comments are unread on that appendix. There was an individual response received from a ward councillor, which is attached to Appendix 3. And again, officers' comments have been highlighted on that response in red. And there's some of those which are possible members may wish to discuss that tonight. I did send an email yesterday with further clarification on one of those points in that appendix. Because since the report was put together, there's been further clarification on one of the points, and what it was agreed to put an additional sentence into paragraph 13.4 of the licensing policy. So I've given you all a new copy of page 59 and 60 of that policy, so you can see what that change is. A summary of responses received by email to the consultation is attached at Appendix 4, again with officers' comments. And there was also a separate email from the District Commander of the Police, which is put in the report at paragraph 5.8. But there was no change from that to the report, to the policy. So on consideration of all those responses, there was some minor changes made to that policy, and that is now put as Appendix 1 with all those changes highlighted. So you can see exactly the difference between the one that you saw in July and the one that is now proposed tonight. So if members approve this new policy, it will be referred to full council, and the policy will be in effect for 5 years, unless it's determined that an early review is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that I do appreciate Councillor Parker taking the trouble to read this through and make his comments, because he's an experienced member of this committee and has only recently left it. And he is also the ward councillor for the town centre area, which obviously has a huge impact in licensing. And obviously I appreciate that some of them are very minor, but nevertheless it's good to be able to discuss these. Could I just first of all then ask, you've read through this revised policy with the very minor amendments in red. Are you happy with those minor amendments that are incorporated now? Yes, we're all generally agreed on that. Yes, thank you. Therefore, if we could just look in some detail about 1 or 2 things that are contained in appendices 2 and 3, if you could turn to those. I haven't got a page number, have I? Oh yes, it must be page 80 of 123. First of all, just the 2 comments, comment 1 and comment 2. Are we happy that officers have dealt satisfactorily with the comments made? Yes, agreed. Thank you very much. So we've really just got 3 things to look at from the ward councillor's submission. The first one is, if you look on the first page of his comments, which is 84 of 123, it's his 3rd point down where it says responsible authorities and other persons. He is suggesting that that particular section is moved to earlier on in the statement. Do you have any views on that, by the way, please? If I could state my view, I've looked at it and I can't see any merit in changing where it is. It seems to be in a perfectly reasonable place. But if any of you think otherwise, I'll gladly take your reasons. No? Okay, so shall we just say we'll leave that one where it is? Thank you very much. Right. If we therefore move on to the top of the next page, this is something that we've been asked to discuss. The ward councillor has objected to the fact that only rural residents are inevitably expecting a tranquility of their lifestyle, and he feels that urban residents should also have that same expectation, and that should be shown in our policy. Officers disagree. They believe that there's an expectation that living in a rural area is not the same as living in a busy nighttime economy area. Any views on that, please? Councillor Godison.
Well, I think in this particular case, I'd rather agree with the borough officers. I mean, I think it's not. It would be equitable to say it's all exactly the same for rural and urban, but in practical terms, it isn't the same. And I don't think people should necessarily have the same expectations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Regan.
I disagree. But I think everybody's entitled to a good night's sleep, aren't they? It has to reflect. I can understand the ward council. I mean, all right, if you can still live in a village somewhere, but you still have the noisy pub next door, can't you? So it's just the same as living in a town with a noisy pub in a town. So I think they're both you have a bit of quality in this, I think.
Thank you. Any other views? We've got opposing opinions here. Yes, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to agree with Councillor Goddison. I think the best will in the world to be entirely reasonable. One wouldn't expect living in the centre of town to be the same as living in the centre of a village. It would be lovely if it was, but unfortunately it isn't. And I think we have to face reality, and that's just the way fact of life, I'm afraid.
Councillor Godison.
Thank you. I agree entirely with Councillor Regan that everybody should be entitled to, whether they're in rural or urban, to a good night's sleep. I just think in practical terms, when you've got an urban environment with a couple of pubs at each end of the lane, it's more likely, sadly, that there will be disturbance, and that's what the environmental officers are there to try and alleviate. Thank you.
If I could just make an opinion of my own, I think if we try to incorporate the phrase tranquility of lifestyle in our town dwellers, I think it would play havoc with our subcommittees trying to get anything passed in our towns. I don't think tranquility and living in a town really go together. Personally, I think I can settle with it as it is. Anyway, can we just have some sort of agreement on it? Who would agree to leave it as it is? Thank you. 6 agree and the rest disagree. Okay. We'll leave it as it is. Thank you. There's just one more thing we need to discuss, and that's the next point that's made. I believe it says... Oh no, that's just simply the insertion of the new sentence, which was something that Karen actually introduced later. Are we happy with having that new sentence inserted, presuming that you've all read it? Yes? Agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, I think that's all that we need to discuss about the statement of licensing policy. So that is now approved as it's amended and as we've discussed and agreed. Thank you very much. Just before you go then, we've just comment on the two matters that have been dealt with by subcommittee since we last met. But they're given in detail, the decisions are given in detail at the end. In a nutshell, the licence was granted at Barton's Mill and the variation was granted for the Soldier's Return.
Noted.
Thank you. Noted. End of meeting. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.